The smoke still rose from the broken buildings as Jake Morrison moved carefully through the rubble. His boots crunched on shattered glass and twisted metal. The settlement had been beautiful once, he could tell. Now it was just another casualty of a war that nobody seemed able to stop. "Morrison, we need to move out," Captain Amy Rodriguez called through his helmet radio. "Command says enemy forces are regrouping 10 clicks north." Jake nodded but kept searching. His job was to find survivors, and he took that job seriously. 3 years as a combat medic had taught him that every life mattered, even in the middle of this endless conflict between humans and the Xylothians. The aliens had started this war, everyone said, but standing in the ruins of what had clearly been homes and shops, Jake wondered if the ordinary people on either side had wanted any of this. The other Marines in his unit were already heading back to the transport ships. Jake knew he should follow them, but something made him pause near a collapsed structure that might have been a home. He heard it then, faint and broken, crying. "Hold on," Jake said into his radio. "I think someone's alive in here." "Morrison, we don't have time," Rodriguez replied, her voice tight. "That's probably just the wind through the ruins." But Jake was already moving. He had heard too many sounds of suffering to mistake this for anything else. Someone small was trapped under the debris, and they were terrified. He began pulling away chunks of wall and broken furniture, his hands working fast despite the weight of his armor. "Jake, seriously, we need to go," called Chris Bennett, his best friend and fellow Marine. Chris jogged back toward him. "What are you doing?" "There's a kid in here," Jake said, not stopping. "Help me." Chris hesitated only a moment before joining him. Together they lifted a large piece of ceiling that had collapsed. Underneath, in a small pocket of space, was a child. She was Xylothian. That was obvious from her pale blue skin and the delicate ridges along her forehead. But she was also clearly very young, maybe 7 or 8 years old by human standards. Her large dark eyes were wide with fear, and her small body was covered in dust and minor cuts. She wore what had once been a pretty dress, now torn and dirty. In one hand, she clutched a small pendant that glowed with a soft blue light. "Hey, it's okay," Jake said softly, removing his helmet so she could see his face. "I'm not going to hurt you." The child whimpered and pressed herself further into the corner. Jake understood. He was the enemy in her eyes. A human soldier, one of the people who had destroyed her home. "Please," he said, reaching out slowly. "You're hurt. Let me help you." The girl stared at him for a long moment. Then she spoke in broken Terran Standard, the common human language. "Mama? Where Mama?" Jake's heart clenched. Of course she wanted her mother. Every scared child did. "I'll help you find her," he said, even though he had no idea if that was possible. "But first, let me look at your arm." The child had a deep cut on her left arm that was bleeding steadily. Jake opened his medical kit and began cleaning the wound. She flinched but didn't pull away. As he worked, she kept repeating the same words. "Mama, find Mama, please." "What's your name?" Jake asked gently. "Liara," the child whispered. "I'm Jake. You're very brave, Liara." By the time he finished bandaging her arm, Chris had returned with Captain Rodriguez. The captain's face went pale when she saw what Jake had found. "Morrison, step away from the alien child," Rodriguez ordered. "She's hurt and scared," Jake said, lifting Liara carefully. The girl wrapped her thin arms around his neck. "I'm not leaving her here." "That's an order, Marine. We don't have time for this, and we certainly don't have authorization to take enemy civilians." "She's not the enemy," Jake said firmly. "She's a little girl." "Morrison, if you don't put that child down and get to the transport, I will have you charged with disobeying direct orders in a combat zone." Jake looked down at Liara. She was trembling against his chest, her face buried in his shoulder. He thought about his own little sister Sophie back on Earth. If Sophie were trapped and scared in a war zone, he would want someone to help her, enemy or not. "Then charge me," Jake said. "I'm taking her." He walked past his shocked captain, carrying Liara toward the transport ships. Chris followed without a word, covering Jake's back. Rodriguez stood frozen for a moment, then cursed and followed them. The ride back to the medical frigate was tense. Liara wouldn't let go of Jake, even when the ship's doctor wanted to examine her. She had fallen into an exhausted sleep against his chest, her small hand still gripping that glowing pendant. Chris sat down next to Jake as the transport flew through the atmosphere. "You know you're probably going to face a court-martial for this, right?" "I know," Jake said quietly. "Was it worth it?" Jake looked down at the sleeping child. Despite being from different worlds, despite being on opposite sides of a war, she was just a kid who needed help. "Yeah," he said. "It was worth it." It wasn't until later, when they were aboard the frigate Nightingale, that Jake got a closer look at the pendant Liara still held. Chris had smuggled them into Jake's quarters, knowing that once Command found out about the Xylothian child, Jake would be arrested. The pendant bore markings that Chris recognized from intelligence briefings. Royal markings. "Jake," Chris said slowly, his face going white. "Do you know who you rescued?" Jake looked at the sleeping child on his bunk. "A kid named Liara?" "Princess Liara, daughter of Queen Sareth, the Xylothian ruler." Chris pulled up a file on his datapad, showing Jake an image of the queen with her daughter. It was the same child. "She's been missing for 3 weeks. The Xylothians think we kidnapped her. That's why they've been hitting us so hard lately." Jake's mind raced. The war had gotten worse over the past month. Attacks had become more brutal, more desperate. If the Xylothians thought humans had taken their princess, no wonder they were fighting like cornered animals. "We have to tell someone," Jake said. "If you tell Command, they'll either use her as a hostage or return her for political gain. Either way, you lose control of the situation." Chris paced the small room. "But if we don't tell anyone, you're harboring the enemy's most valuable person. That's way beyond disobeying orders." Liara stirred in her sleep, murmuring one word again. "Mama." Jake made his decision. "Then we find a way to contact her mother ourselves." For 2 days, Jake kept Liara hidden in his quarters aboard the Nightingale. It wasn't easy. The medical frigate had over 300 crew members, and someone was bound to discover them eventually. But Jake needed time to figure out the right move. Liara was slowly starting to trust him. She still jumped at loud noises and woke up crying from nightmares. But she had started talking more. Her Terran standard was limited, but Jake was patient. He learned that she had been taken from her home by people wearing masks. They had kept her in a dark place for a long time. She didn't know how she ended up in the settlement, only that there had been a lot of noise and fire. And then she was alone. "They wanted Mama to be sad," Liara said one morning, picking at the food Jake had brought her. "I heard them say it." Jake felt sick. Someone had kidnapped this child deliberately to hurt the queen, and from what he was learning, it might not have been humans at all. Chris had been digging through intelligence files, something he could get in serious trouble for. But he had found something interesting. The settlement where Jake found Liara had been hit by both sides during the fighting. At first, everyone assumed it was human bombs that did most of the damage, but the reports showed Xylothian weapon signatures too. "What if someone from her own side did this?" Chris asked, sitting in Jake's quarters late at night while Liara slept. "What if they wanted the princess dead and wanted to make it look like we did it?" "Who would benefit from that?" Jake asked. "Hardliners who want the war to continue. On both sides, there are people making money from this conflict, people gaining power. Peace would ruin them." Jake rubbed his tired eyes. 3 years of war had taught him that nothing was ever simple. "We need help," he said. "Someone we can trust." That's when Chris suggested Dr. Lisa Harper. She was the ship's head doctor, known for her independence and her dislike of military politics. More importantly, she had taken an oath to heal anyone who needed help, regardless of which side they were on. They waited until her night shift, then brought Liara to the medical bay through the maintenance corridors. Lisa was surprised to see them, but her professional instincts kicked in immediately when she saw the child. "How long has she been aboard?" Lisa asked, examining Liara gently. The girl was nervous, but seemed to understand that the doctor was trying to help. 2 days, Jake admitted. "She needs proper care, but I couldn't risk anyone finding her." Lisa worked in silence for a while, checking Liara's healing wounds and running some scans. Finally, she stepped away, her face grave. "Jake, come look at this." The scanner showed something small embedded near Liara's spine, a tracking device. "Someone put this in her," Lisa explained quietly. "Recently, from the looks of it. Maybe a week before you found her." Jake felt cold. "The kidnappers?" "Probably. But here's the concerning part. It's still active. Which means someone knows exactly where she is right now." They all stood in shocked silence. Then Chris spoke up. "We need to get that thing out of her now." Lisa nodded. "I can do it. It's a simple procedure. But Jake, once it goes offline, whoever is tracking her will know something happened. We'll have maybe a few hours before they respond." "Do it," Jake said. He knelt down next to Liara, taking her small hand. "Liara, Dr. Lisa needs to do a small operation. It won't hurt much, I promise. Can you be brave for me?" Liara looked scared, but she nodded. "You stay? I'll be right here the whole time." The procedure took less than an hour. Lisa removed the tracking device and placed it in a containment box. Liara was groggy from the anesthesia, but otherwise fine. Jake carried her back to his quarters while Chris and Lisa stayed behind to talk. "We're out of time," Chris said when he returned an hour later. "I did some checking. There's been increased communication between the ship and Fleet Command. I think someone knows something is wrong." Jake had been thinking while Chris was gone. He had made a decision, one that would probably end his military career and might even end his life. But it was the right thing to do. "I'm going to contact the Xylothians directly," he said. "I'm going to tell Queen Sareth that her daughter is alive and safe." "That's treason," Chris said flatly. "I know. But it's also the only way to end this. If I go through official channels, Liara becomes a political tool. She gets caught up in negotiations and posturing. It could take months. Meanwhile, whoever wants her dead might find another way to get to her. And if the Xylothians think it's a trap, they might just attack the ship. Then I'll make it clear I'm acting alone, that I'm not speaking for the Terran Alliance." Jake looked at his friend. "I'm not asking you to help with this part. You've already done enough. This is on me." Chris was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled slightly. "You know, I never liked this war anyway. Too many good people dying for reasons nobody can quite explain. If you're going to commit treason, at least make it count." Together, they drafted a message. Jake kept it simple and direct. He identified himself, explained how he found Liara, and stated that he wanted to return her safely to her mother. He included a video of Liara holding her pendant, speaking a few words in Xylothian that Chris helped translate. She said her name and that she wanted to go home. "Are you sure about this?" Chris asked, his hand hovering over the send button. Jake looked over at Liara, who was playing with a small toy he had found for her. She was humming softly, a child's song from her world. She should be home, safe with her mother, not caught in the middle of a war she didn't understand. "Send it," Jake said. The message went out on an open Xylothian frequency, one that military intelligence would definitely detect. Within minutes, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Jake heard boots running in the corridor outside his door. He picked up Liara as his door burst open. Captain Rodriguez stood there with 4 armed Marines behind her. Her face was a mix of anger and disbelief. "Marine Jake Morrison, you are under arrest for treason, unauthorized communication with enemy forces, and harboring an enemy alien," she said formally. Then her voice softened slightly. "Jake, what have you done?" "The right thing," Jake said calmly. He held Liara close as she clung to him, confused by all the shouting. "I saved a child and I'm bringing her home. If that's treason, then I'm guilty." They put restraints on his wrists, but let him continue holding Liara. She wouldn't let anyone else near her anyway. As the Marines escorted him to the brig, he heard Rodriguez speaking quietly into her comm. "Yes, sir. We have him. And yes, the Xylothian princess is confirmed aboard. What are your orders?" Jake didn't hear the response, but he knew his fate was now in the hands of people far above his rank. He just hoped they would make the right choice, not just the political one. For Liara's sake, and maybe for everyone's sake. The brig was cold and sterile, but they had given Jake a small room instead of a cell because Liara refused to be separated from him. She sat curled up against his side on the narrow bunk, clutching her pendant and watching the door nervously. Every time someone walked by, she flinched. "It's okay," Jake told her gently. "Nobody's going to hurt you." He didn't know if he was lying. The truth was he had no idea what would happen next. Admiral Ryan Mitchell arrived on the Nightingale 6 hours after Jake's arrest. The admiral was a stern man in his 50s, known for running a tight fleet and for having little patience with soldiers who broke the rules. Jake had never met him personally, but everyone knew his reputation. They brought Jake to a conference room for questioning. He insisted that Liara come with him, and after a brief argument, they agreed. She sat on his lap during the entire meeting, her small arms wrapped around him. Admiral Mitchell sat across the table, flanked by Commander Helena Brooks from Intelligence and Ambassador Victor Kane, a diplomatic representative. They all stared at Jake like he was some kind of puzzle they couldn't solve. "Do you understand the severity of what you've done?" Mitchell asked, his voice hard. "Yes, sir," Jake replied calmly. "You've committed treason. You've contacted the enemy without authorization. You could be executed for this." "I understand, sir." Mitchell leaned forward. "Then why did you do it?" Jake looked down at Liara, who was watching him with those large, trusting eyes. "Because she's a child who needs her mother, and because returning her might end this war. That seemed more important than following protocol. More important than your life, your career, your freedom?" "Yes, sir, it was." Ambassador Kane spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "The Xylothians have responded to your message, Morrison. They want proof that Princess Liara is alive and unharmed." "She's right here," Jake said. "She can speak for herself." Commander Brooks had been quiet until now, studying her datapad. "I've been investigating your theory about the kidnapping," she said. "The evidence supports it. The settlement where you found the princess shows signs of a coordinated attack designed to look like random battle damage. We've identified several Xylothian military officials who have been communicating with known war profiteers. On our side, too, I'm afraid." Mitchell's expression darkened. "Are you telling me elements of both militaries wanted this child dead?" "Not just wanted her dead, sir. They've been actively working to escalate the war. With the princess missing and presumed killed by humans, Queen Sareth had no choice but to intensify attacks. The longer the war continues, the more money and power certain people gain." "That's sick," Jake said quietly. "That's war," Brooks replied. "Or at least, that's what war becomes when the wrong people gain control of it." Admiral Mitchell was silent for a long time. Jake could see him thinking, weighing options. Finally, the Admiral spoke. "If we return the princess through official channels, it will take weeks of negotiations. There will be demands and counter-demands, political posturing, And during all that time, the people who wanted her dead will have opportunities to try again. And if we use her as a hostage? Ambassador Kane asked carefully. Then we're no better than the people who took her in the first place, Mitchell said firmly. No. Morrison might be a traitor, but he's a traitor with the right idea. He looked at Jake directly. We're going to arrange a meeting. Neutral space, minimal forces on both sides. You will personally return Princess Liara to Queen Sareth. Jake felt relief wash through him. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. If this goes wrong, if it's a trap, we're all dead, and you'll still face charges after this is over. But at least those charges won't include getting a child killed. The next 2 days were a flurry of activity. Messages went back and forth between the Terran fleet and the Xylothian forces. Both sides were suspicious, both expecting a trap, but Queen Sareth's responses became increasingly desperate when she saw the videos of her daughter. She wanted her child back, and she was willing to meet human demands to make it happen. They chose an old trading station on the border of neutral space. It had been abandoned years ago when the war started. Now it would host one of the most important meetings in recent history. Jake spent those 2 days with Liara, trying to prepare her. He taught her that she would see her mother soon. She grew more excited each day, but also more anxious. She had been through so much trauma that even good news felt scary. Will you come too? She asked him the night before the meeting. I'll bring you to your mother, Jake promised. But then I have to go back to my people. Liara's eyes filled with tears. Don't want you to go. You saved me. You're my friend. Jake felt his throat tighten. In just a few days, this small alien child had found her way into his heart. I'll always be your friend, he said, and friends don't forget each other, even when they're far apart. She seemed to accept that, though she made him promise to visit if he could. The day of the meeting arrived. Jake put on a clean uniform, knowing it might be the last time he wore one. They dressed Liara in new clothes that had been specially made for her, in the style of Xylothian royal children. She looked beautiful and very small. The transport took them to the station with a full security detail. General Marcus Webb, the security chief, made it clear he thought this was a terrible idea. One wrong move and we're starting a battle in close quarters, he muttered. Lieutenant Danny Price, a young officer assigned to guard Jake, was more optimistic. Maybe it'll work, he said quietly. Stranger things have happened. When they docked at the station, Jake could see the Xylothian ships on the other side through the viewport. Massive vessels, sleek and deadly, weapons powered but not armed. The Terran ships were in similar positions. One mistake, one misunderstanding, and everyone in the station would die. They walked through the empty corridors to the meeting chamber. It was a large room with windows on both sides, showing the fleets waiting outside. In the center was a neutral zone marked on the floor. Admiral Mitchell, Ambassador Kane, and Commander Brooks were already there with a dozen Marines. On the other side of the room, a door opened, and the Xylothian delegation entered. Jake had seen Xylothians before in battle, but never like this. They were dignified, wearing formal robes and carrying themselves with pride. And in the center, taller than the rest and wearing a crown of what looked like living crystal, was Queen Sareth. She was beautiful in an alien way, her features sharp and regal. But her eyes were haunted. They were the eyes of a mother who had lost her child and had been slowly dying inside ever since. Liara made a small sound, a gasp of recognition. She had seen her mother. The room fell silent. Jake felt the weight of history on his shoulders. Everything he did in the next few minutes would echo through time, affecting millions of lives on both sides of this war. He took a deep breath, lifted Liara gently in his arms, and began walking toward the neutral zone. Jake felt every eye in the room on him as he carried Liara toward the neutral zone. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Behind him, he could sense the Terran guards with their fingers near their weapons. Across the room, the Xylothian warriors looked equally tense. Liara pressed her face against his shoulder, suddenly shy after weeks of separation from her mother. Jake could feel her trembling. "It's okay," he whispered to her. "Your mama is right there." "See her?" Liara peeked out and looked at the tall figure of Queen Sareth standing across the neutral zone. The queen had frozen in place, her hands pressed to her mouth. Even from a distance, Jake could see tears beginning to stream down her face. "Mama," Liara said softly, as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. Jake reached the edge of the neutral zone and stopped. This was the moment of maximum danger. He was standing between two armed groups who had been killing each other for 3 years. If anyone on either side lost their nerve, started shooting, he would be the first to die. But he wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about the promise he had made to a scared little girl in the ruins. He had promised to help her find her mother. It was time to keep that promise. He slowly knelt down and set Liara on her feet. She looked up at him, uncertain. "Go ahead," Jake said gently, smiling at her. "Go to your mama." For a second, Liara didn't move. Then she looked across at her mother, and something broke inside her. All the fear, all the pain, all the lonely nights wanting her mother came out in a cry that echoed through the silent room. "Mama! Mama, I'm back! He saved me!" Liara ran. Her small legs carried her as fast as they could across the neutral zone. Queen Sareth dropped to her knees, her royal dignity forgotten, her arms spread wide. When Liara crashed into her, the queen wrapped her daughter in an embrace so tight it seemed like she would never let go. The sound that came from Queen Sareth was not royal or dignified. It was the raw, broken sob of a mother who had thought her child was dead. She held Liara and cried, her whole body shaking. Liara was crying too, her small arms around her mother's neck, saying, "Mama," over and over again in Xylothian. Jake stood at the edge of the neutral zone, watching. His own eyes were wet. He wasn't the only one. Looking around the room, he saw hardened Marines wiping their eyes. Even General Webb had turned away, his jaw clenched tight. On the Xylothian side, several of the warriors were openly weeping. Some things transcended species. Some things were universal. And there was nothing more universal than a mother's love for her child. Queen Sareth finally looked up from her daughter, her eyes finding Jake. She said something in Xylothian. Her voice choked with emotion. One of her advisors translated, though Jake could hear the translator's voice shaking. The queen asks, "Who is the human who saved her daughter?" Jake stepped forward slightly. "Jake Morrison, Your Majesty. I'm a combat medic with the Terran Marines." Queen Sareth stood slowly, still holding Liara on her hip. The child had her face buried in her mother's neck, unwilling to let go even for a moment. The queen walked forward into the neutral zone, her guards tensing but not stopping her. She stopped right in front of Jake. Up close, he could see that her eyes were the same color as Liara's, a deep violet that seemed to hold entire galaxies. Those eyes studied him carefully. "You are the one," she said in careful Terran standard. "You found my daughter in the ruins?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "You could have left her there. You could have used her as a hostage. You could have harmed her." Queen Sareth's voice was steady now, but filled with wonder. "Why did you save her?" Jake thought about how to answer. He could talk about duty, about honor, about military codes. But none of that was the real truth. The real truth was much simpler. "Because she was scared and hurt and she needed help," Jake said. "Because she's just a kid who wanted her mom. That seemed more important than the war." Queen Sareth was silent for a long moment. Then she did something that made everyone in the room gasp. She bowed to Jake. a deep formal bow that no Xylothian royal had ever given to a human before. "You gave me back my life," she said, her voice breaking again. "You gave me back my reason to breathe. There are no words in any language to thank you for what you have done." "I don't need thanks," Jake said quietly. "Seeing her with you, safe and happy, that's enough." Liara had been listening. She pulled back from her mother and looked at Jake. "Jake, my friend," she said in Terran standard, showing off the words he had taught her. "Jake is good. Jake saved me when bad people hurt me." Queen Sareth's expression changed. "Bad people? Liara, who took you? Was it humans?" Liara shook her head firmly. "People with masks. They spoke like us. They said they wanted you to be sad and angry. They said war is good for them." The Queen's eyes went wide. She looked at her advisors, then at the Terran delegation. "This was not humans?" Commander Brooks stepped forward. "No, Your Majesty. We have evidence that suggests a conspiracy involving military officials from both sides. People who profit from the war wanted it to continue. Taking your daughter and making it look like a Terran attack was their plan." Queen Sareth's face became hard as stone. "Names. Give me names." "We're still investigating," Brooks said. "But we will share everything we find. If your people want to help with the investigation, we would welcome it." The Queen looked down at her daughter, then back at Jake. "This human risked his life and his freedom to save my child and to bring her home. He risked everything for peace." She raised her voice so everyone in the room could hear. "If he can do this, if he can show such courage and compassion, then surely we can find the courage to stop this war." Admiral Mitchell stepped forward. "Queen Sareth, the Terran Alliance would welcome peace talks. We are prepared to negotiate an immediate ceasefire." "As am I," the Queen said. "Effective immediately. No more fighting, no more children losing their mothers, no more mothers losing their children." She looked at Jake again. "This human has shown us the way. He has shown us that we are not as different as we thought. That kindness and courage exist in every species." Liara reached out from her mother's arms toward Jake. He stepped closer, and she touched his face gently with her small hand. "Thank you," she said carefully in Terran standard. "Thank you for bringing me home." Jake smiled at her, his vision blurring with tears. "You're welcome, little one. Take care of your mama, okay?" Liara nodded seriously. Then she looked at her mother. "Mama, Jake is hero. Can he visit us?" Queen Sareth's severe expression softened. She looked at Jake with something like respect. "Marine Jake Morrison, if your people punish you for what you have done, you will always have a home with the Xylothian people. My daughter's savior will always be welcome in our house." The room erupted in activity after that. Advisors from both sides began talking quickly, working out details. But Jake just stood there, watching Liara nestle safely in her mother's arms where she belonged. He had saved one life, just one small scared child. But somehow that one act had changed everything. The news spread across human space within hours. Videos of the reunion had been recorded by both sides, and someone had leaked them to every major news network. By the time Jake returned to the Nightingale, his face was on every screen in the fleet. People were calling him a hero. They were also calling him a traitor. Opinion was sharply divided. Jake didn't pay much attention to any of it. He was back in the brig, waiting to find out what would happen to him. The ceasefire was holding, which was good. Peace talks had begun, which was even better. But he had still broken military law, and someone would have to decide what to do about that. Chris visited him whenever he could. "You're famous," he said, sitting outside the cell. "There are protests on Earth demanding they give you a medal, other protests demanding they throw you in prison for life." "What do you think will happen?" Jake asked. Chris shrugged. "Honestly, I think they're too scared to punish you now. You're a symbol. If they come down hard on you, People will see it as the military punishing compassion. But if they let you go free, it sets a precedent that soldiers can ignore orders if they think they're doing the right thing. Sounds like I've created a problem. You've created a lot of problems, Chris agreed, grinning. But you also maybe ended a war, so I'd say you came out ahead. The military tribunal was held 1 week later. Jake stood in his dress uniform before a panel of 5 senior officers, including Admiral Mitchell. The chamber was packed with observers, media, and military personnel. Outside, protests on both sides were still ongoing. Colonel Brandon Hayes was the lead prosecutor. He laid out the charges carefully. Disobeying direct orders in a combat zone, unauthorized contact with enemy forces, harboring an enemy alien without authorization. Each charge carried serious penalties. Together, they could mean decades in a military prison. Jake didn't have much of a defense. He had done everything they said he did. His lawyer, a kind older woman named Captain Julia Norton, tried to argue necessity and humanitarian grounds. But the law was clear, and Jake had broken it. Then something unexpected happened. A message arrived from President Catherine Walsh herself, the leader of the Terran Alliance. She requested permission to address the tribunal. It was highly unusual, but nobody was going to say no to the president. President Walsh appeared on the main screen, speaking from her office on Earth. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, known for being practical and direct. "I've been following this case closely," she said. "What Maureen Morrison did was technically illegal, but it was also morally right. He saw a child in danger and helped her, despite the personal cost. He then took the initiative to return her to her mother, which directly led to a ceasefire that has saved thousands of lives on both sides." She paused, letting her words sink in. "If we punish this man, we send a message that following the letter of the law is more important than doing what's right. We tell our soldiers that compassion is a weakness. I don't believe that, and I don't think the Terran Alliance should believe that either." The prosecutors looked uncertain. President Walsh continued. "I am formally recommending that all charges be dropped and that Maureen Morrison be commended for his actions. The Xylothian Queen has also sent a personal message asking that he not be punished. Are we really going to imprison the man who ended a 3-year war?" The tribunal took a recess to deliberate. Jake sat with Captain Norton, feeling numb. "What does this mean?" he asked. "It means the president just put her reputation on the line for you," Norton said. "They'll have to drop the charges now. But Jake, you understand that your military career is probably over, right? Even if they don't court-martial you, you've become too controversial. Some commanders will never trust you again." Jake nodded slowly. He had expected that. When the tribunal returned, Admiral Mitchell read the decision. "After careful consideration and in light of the extraordinary circumstances, this tribunal finds that while Maureen Morrison's actions were technically in violation of military code, they resulted in a positive outcome that far outweighs the breach of protocol. All charges are dismissed. Furthermore, Maureen Morrison is awarded the Star of Valor for actions above and beyond the call of duty." The room erupted in cheers and boos, depending on which side people were on. Jake just felt tired and relieved. The peace treaty was signed 2 months later. It was a complex document, negotiated by teams of diplomats from both sides. But at its core was a simple principle: no more war. Trade would resume. Prisoners would be exchanged. And a joint investigation would hunt down the people who had orchestrated Liara's kidnapping and had worked to keep the war going. Jake was invited to the signing ceremony as an honored guest. He stood in a formal hall on a neutral world, watching as President Walsh and Queen Sareth put their signatures on the treaty. When it was done, the Queen looked directly at him and nodded. A promise kept. After the ceremony, Queen Sareth approached him. Liara was with her, holding her mother's hand. The little girl looked healthy and happy now, the trauma fading slowly with time and love. "Marine Morrison," the Queen said formally, "I have a request." "Your Majesty? My people need to understand humans better, to see you as more than enemies. I would like to invite you to serve as an ambassador to the Xylothian homeworld. You would help build bridges between our peoples." Jake was stunned. "I don't know anything about diplomacy. You know about compassion. You know about doing what's right even when it's difficult. That's what we need." Queen Sareth smiled slightly. "And my daughter has asked for you every day since we parted. She would like to see her friend again." Liara nodded eagerly. "Please come visit, Jake. Please." How could he say no to that? 6 months later, Jake stood in the gardens of the royal palace on the Xylothian homeworld. It was beautiful, full of plants that glowed softly in colors humans had never seen before. Liara was running ahead of him, showing him her favorite spots, chattering excitedly about everything. "And this is where the moonflowers grow, and over there is the singing fountain, and oh, Jake, you have to see the star-glass sculptures." Jake followed her, smiling. His sister Sophie had sent him a message that morning, saying she was proud of him. Chris had been promoted and was serving on the same diplomatic mission. Dr. Lisa Harper had taken a position in the new Joint Human-Xylothian Medical Program. Life had changed completely. But it was a good change. He looked up at the alien sky, thinking about how he had ended up here. 3 years ago, he had been just another soldier in a war that seemed endless. One decision, one choice to help a scared child had changed everything. Liara came running back to him, grabbing his hand. "Come on, Jake! Mama wants to show you the archives. They have stories about humans now, true stories, because we're friends now, not enemies." "Friends," Jake agreed. "That's much better than enemies." They walked together through the garden, human and alien, a soldier and a princess, 2 people from different worlds who had found common ground. Around them, other humans and Xylothians worked together, building a future that few had thought possible. Jake thought about all the people who had said it couldn't be done, that the war was too old, the hatred too deep, the differences too great. They had been wrong. It just took one person willing to see past all of that, to see what really mattered. A scared child who needed help. That's all it had taken to start changing the universe. "Jake?" Liara looked up at him. "Are you happy here?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Yeah, little one. I'm happy." And he was. The war was over. The peace was holding. And he had kept his promise to a little girl who just wanted her mama. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Behind them, in the palace, Queen Sareth watched through a window as her daughter played with the human who had saved her. She had learned many things from this war and from its ending. The most important was that courage came in many forms. Sometimes it looked like a soldier carrying a child through ruins. Sometimes it looked like a mother fighting to protect her people. And sometimes it looked like 2 species choosing peace over pride. She smiled and turned back to her work. There was still much to do, but for the first time in years, she had hope, real hope, the kind that grew from understanding and compassion instead of fear, the kind of hope that a simple combat medic named Jake Morrison had given to an entire galaxy by doing one small, perfect thing, helping a child find her way home.